at this hour, we looked at three ancient archetypal codes. We looked at Gnosticism, we looked at alchemy, and we looked at Kabbalah. Today we are going to start by looking at a more recent archetypal code, namely Freemasonry. Now Freemasonry traces itself to very ancient origins, but that tracing is legendary rather than documented. And I'll talk about the difference between historical tracings in just a moment, because we will look at a chart of the whole supposed history of Freemasonry. I have called this, maybe we could get those lights off and this one on. Does no one know how to work the lights?
Yes.
They're over here. That's lovely. I've called this Revealing the Masonic Code, but I must tell you that I'm not going to reveal any Masonic secrets. In fact, there are not many Masonic secrets. Much of Masonry is private, but that's different from being secret. Now, I will show you some private things, which normally are not publicized. There are only really two kinds of Masonic secrets. One are called genuine secrets, and the other are called substitute secrets. And I'm not going to reveal either of those. I'm not going to reveal substitute secrets because I am a Freemason and I have sworn not to reveal them. This is a little ironic because, in fact, you can go to any large library and find a book which will tell you all of those secrets. But nevertheless, I have sworn not to reveal them, so I will not. I will not reveal any of the genuine secrets because it is impossible to do so. The genuine secrets cannot be put into words, so they are perfectly safe from all possible revelation. So consequently, revealing the secrets is something of a misnomer. Nevertheless, I'll do what I can to reveal to you some of the private things about Freemasonry. To begin with, I want to make 5 points about Freemasonry as background to what we will be looking at this morning. The first is that Freemasonry is a form of the ancient mysteries, and that's part of the reason which allows Freemasonry to claim for itself a very ancient origin. It does not descend directly from the ancient mysteries, but it is a kind of recreation of them. It's a little bit like this. There are rivers of water which run upon the surface of the land, right? Like the Nile and the Amazon and all of the other rivers. But there are also rivers which run underneath the surface of the land, right? Subterranean rivers. And from time to time, a subterranean river will send up a fountain onto the land, right? Well, we have, I think, in the archetypal codes, a kind of subterranean river, which runs throughout human history. And from time to time, it sends up fountains. The ancient mysteries were one such fountain. I think that Freemasonry is another such fountain, and it shares some characteristics with the ancient mysteries. What are those characteristics? Well, that's what we are going to be talking about today. The mysteries, whether they are the ancient mysteries or modern Freemasonry, and now I am paraphrasing or quoting Aristotle. Aristotle, the great philosopher, talked about the ancient mysteries, and he said the mysteries are not something you learn. They're not a matter of cognitive, intellectual knowledge. The mysteries, rather, were about experiencing something and being changed by the experience. Okay? And that's the genuine secret of Freemasonry. That experience and the change which may come from it. Right? And that's why it can't be put into words. Any more, to return to an example I used the other day, any more than you can put into words the experience of tasting a lemon. You can talk around it, but you can't put it into words. Even more so with spiritual experiences. You can't put them into words. You can talk around them, but you cannot verbalize them directly. So the ancient mysteries and modern Freemasonry has no intellectual content. None whatever. It has no information. You can give information about it. You can talk about it, which I'm going to be doing. But you can't act, but it itself is not a matter of intellectual knowledge. It's a matter of an experience and the effect of that experience on those who have it. The principal subject of Freemasonry is death and resurrection. Now let me explain that. What did we say the mysteries, including modern Freemasonry, are really about? Experiencing something and being changed by the experience. What does change involve? Change involves a death to the old and a rebirth to the new. Is that not right? Every change involves a death and a resurrection, a death and a rebirth. And when I say that the principal subject of Freemasonry is death and resurrection, I mean it is change. It is death of an old something and the resurrection or rebirth of a new something. Right? And that something is the experience, the reaction to the experience of Freemasonry. Oh dear. I have to get electrified, sorry. So Freemasonry talks a lot about death and resurrection. But that death and resurrection is not the death of the body and its resurrection. It is the death of an old state of mind and the resurrection of a new state of mind. Clear? Okay. Freemasonry can also be described as a search for that which has been lost. And what is it which has been lost? Well, one way of answering that question is to say that it is, that what has been lost is the experience, the genuine secret, right? Which we all had at one time, but we have lost it. Now I am really echoing Plato. Right? Plato said that every human being knew originally, but underwent a state of amnesia, a state of forgetfulness, and that what spiritual experience is a state of anamnesia. Mnesia means memory. Right? Good Greek word, borrowed into English. Mnesia means memory. Amnesia means no memory. That's alpha privative, the alpha which says no, right? And so then anamnesia means not knowing, which is the same thing as remembering. Okay, so Plato said that spiritual progress is anamnesia, the state of remembering, of coming to recognize what one once knew, but what one had forgotten in the process. And in a sense, that's what has been lost. Our recognition of something which we have to regain. And of course, that something which we have lost is the sense of unity of all life. Everything else is secondary. That's the primary thing which has been lost. The sense of the knowledge, the awareness of the ultimate unity of all life. Now that gets symbolized in Freemasonry in lots of ways. And one way it gets symbolized is to say that at one time there was a knowledge of the name of God. But the name of God has been forgotten. It has been lost, and we have to find it. And those of you who are Freemasons will know that much of Freemasonry is concerned with finding the name of God in different degrees. And it keeps changing. God is very annoying that way. Freemasonry then is a method of search, and its method is ritual. And that ritual is an invocation of spiritual powers into material forms. Now I want to distinguish here two things, ceremony and ritual. Ceremony is a conventional way of doing something, and our lives are full of ceremony. Right? When you meet someone, either for the first time or for the first time of a particular day, what do you do in Western culture? You shake hands, right? That's a ceremony. If you are, however, an Indian and not a Westerner, what do you do when you meet someone? Right? Different ceremony. If you are a Japanese and you meet someone, what do you do? Right? Three different ceremonies, all with the same meaning, right? Now those are basically secular ceremonies. And we have lots of secular ceremonies, which are simply conventional ways of doing things. There are ceremonies for eating, right? There are just all sorts of ceremonies. Everybody understand what I'm saying? That life is full of ceremonies. But a ceremony is simply a conventional way of doing something. Now, what is a ritual? A ritual is a ceremony which changes, or which can change, which has the possibility of changing the person who participates in it. Okay? If I shake your hand in the morning, neither of us changes. We're both the same as we were before. If I do this, we are still both the same. If I do this, we are still both the same. That ceremony, it's a nice ceremony. You know, it says something, it has meaning, but it doesn't really change us. But a real ceremony changes someone. Now, churches have ceremonies, don't they? For most people who go to church, what are the ceremonies of the church? They are ceremonies. Can the ceremony ever be a ritual?
Yes.
Can the ceremony ever change? It depends on the person, doesn't it?
Yes.
A person may be changed if they really tap into the power which is potentially behind the ceremony. A ceremony does not automatically, it's not magic, it doesn't automatically change you, but it offers the possibility of change, and then it is a ritual. Everybody understand the distinction I'm making?
Yes.
All right, for many Freemasons, Masonry is just a ceremony. It's something they do, right? But the Masonic ceremony has the potential of being a ritual, right? Provided you participate in it. All right, now we'll have a quick look at one view of the history of Freemasonry. And as I said, there are three kinds of historical connections. One is documentation. Documented history is history for which we have some kind of evidence, right? Written record or something else of that sort. And then there is legendary history, in which people talk about the history, but there really is no evidence of what they're saying. And then there is what I'm going to call esoteric history. Now, esoteric history is the result of that little metaphor I gave you about the underground river, which pops up from time to time, and it comes from the collective archetypal base, right? Which springs up from time to time through the earth and manifests itself. That is real, I believe. I have often said this, that it would not make any difference if every theosophist in the world were to die today, and if all of the theosophical books in the world were to be burned today, and if all memory of theosophy were to disappear from the world today. It wouldn't make any difference. What would happen tomorrow?
Then something
Theosophy would reemerge, right? Because theosophy is from that collective archetypal base, and that is indestructible. It is in our hearts. It is in the heart of every one of us, right? And it would emerge like a wellspring from our hearts. So we have then this esoteric historical connection. And I'm going to tell you what I think are some historic esoteric connections. Theosophy, Masonry is often said to derive from the ancient continent of Atlantis. Obviously, there's no documentary history about that, but the very concept of Atlantis is a collective archetypal one. Are there stories, myths, legends all over the world about a former continent from which the wise people came? That occurs all over the world. It's an archetype. The whole Eden. In Genesis, it's Eden. We get that all over. So Atlantis is itself an archetype. And then Masonry is often derived from Egypt. It's said to come from ancient Egypt. And Egypt is often said by legendary history to have been derived from Atlantis. But Egypt itself is a great archetype as the land of esoteric wisdom. And then there were the ancient mysteries, of which the most famous was the one whose site many of you visited yesterday, Eleusis. There are many ancient mysteries, but Eleusis is the most famous, probably. The Eleusinian mysteries were practiced for probably at least the 2,000 years. That's a long time. Right? In 500 BC, they were already regarded as ancient. So that's, and they didn't close down until about 500 AD. 1,000 years we know of, but they were already very ancient when they were first, the first historical mention of them. So the ancient mysteries are legendarily derived from Egypt, and there's a lot to be said for that, because, for example, the Eleusinian mysteries talk about Demeter, the earth goddess, and her daughter Persephone, and Demeter is in search of Persephone, who has been lost, and she has many experiences in her search for Persephone. Essentially, those same stories were told in Egypt about Isis, who was in search not of a daughter, but of the 14 parts into which her husband Osiris had been divided. And she undergoes many of exactly the same experiences that Demeter does. So there's a strong reason to believe that the ancient mysteries were in fact derived perhaps from Egypt originally, and they too are clearly an expression of the ancient archetypes. And then there was King Solomon's temple, built in Jerusalem. We're going to talk about it in just a moment a bit more, but it often is legendarily associated with Egypt, and it too is certainly highly archetypal. Now, there were in ancient Rome things called the colleges of artificers, and these were simply associations of craftsmen. People who did a particular kind of work formed an association which was called the college. And all college means, the word college only means a collection, right? A bringing together. There were collections of workmen of different kinds. Now they don't have any connection with any of the other things we saw, but they do have at least a legendary connection with the ancient cathedral builders. The ancient masons, stonemasons of Europe, are often said to have derived or had some connection with the old Roman colleges of artificers. And the cathedral builders also associated themselves with King Solomon's temple. They thought in building cathedrals they were replicating the temple of the Holy Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. Then there were the Knights Templar a bit later. And the Knights Templar are clearly associated with King Solomon's temple. That's why they're called Templars. Their headquarters were the site of King Solomon's temple. And it is believed that they had some association with the ancient mysteries, perhaps from that very temple association. Now we come to the first documented bit of history. In the Renaissance, there was something called the Hermetic Revival. The Hermetic Revival was a re-interest, a new interest, a regained interest in the ancient Hermetic writings which came from Egypt. And there is no doubt that this is an actual historical source for that Renaissance information. But the Hermetic revival also was strongly archetypal, because it was not just a revival of old literary documents. There was a spiritual impulse which came through in the Hermetic revival during the Renaissance. And then in Great Britain, and historians argue about whether it happened first in England or first in Scotland, but in Great Britain certainly, something rather interesting happened. The stonemasons who built the cathedrals and other great buildings got associated with members of the upper class who paid for the buildings. Now, normally the upper class just hire workmen to work for them. But here there was an interesting connection which was established. And one might say, why is that? Well, of all the crafts, the stonemasons had some unique features to them. They were very, very proud. And they were very proud because their work required a kind of knowledge which no other craft required. They were more learned than carpenters or than any other such craft. Why? Well, think about those great buildings they built. What did they need to know in order to keep the roofs up and not fall down? They needed a knowledge of, in fact, engineering, right, or physics, of physics, and of geometry. They needed a kind of information which no other craft needed. And furthermore, then, they developed traditions. They thought of themselves, we've already said, as being associated with King Solomon's temple, so they developed all sorts of legends which connected them with ancient workmen. So they were a unique craft in the Middle Ages, the stonemasons were. So consequently, somewhere in the British Isles, the upper class patrons who paid for the buildings and the craftsmen who actually constructed them got together. And the craftsmen had long had what today we would call unions, right? Guilds, working men's associations. And those working men's associations had various kinds of secrets. They had secret signs of recognition. Why would you want that? Well, again, the stonemasons were unique in a certain way. Carpenters didn't travel around. They worked where they lived. Weavers didn't travel around. They worked where they lived. That was true of crafts generally. But what about stonemasons? They were traveling men. They traveled from one place to another wherever there was a great job, a great cathedral or some other great building being built. And consequently, if you had somebody turn up who said, "Oh, I'm a stonemason. I want to work on this job," how would you know whether or not this person was really trained well? You had to have some signs of recognition, right? So they developed secret words, secret signs, secret grips in order to recognize one another. Well, with these links between the patrons and the craftsmen initiated the patrons into their special signs, right? And so they formed groups. Now, the craftsmen brought to this linkage these signs and this tradition of association with antiquity. What did the upper class people bring? A knowledge of the Hermetic revival. And they brought Hermetic wisdom into this, and they combined it with the craft of stonemasonry. And so stonemasonry became a symbolic activity, and that was the origin of modern Freemasonry. Okay. Now, the first Grand Lodge, a Grand Lodge is a group of Freemasons which authorizes the foundation of other groups of Freemasons, other lodges. The first Grand Lodge was formed in 1717 in London. And that is the beginning of the well-documented history of modern Freemasonry. And it came from these earlier links. Eventually, in the late 19th century, the late 19th century, a French lodge of Masonry was only among men, right? That was one of its few differences, essential differences from the ancient mysteries. The ancient mysteries, with one exception, so far as I know, initiated men and women equally. Right? No difference. They initiated freemen and slaves. The ancient mysteries were radically democratic, radically open. The one exception was the mysteries of Mithra, which admitted only men, because it was associated with the Roman army. But Freemasonry consisted only of men. Why? Well, who were the cathedral builders? There were no women masons. Why not? Because the work of the stonemason requires a kind of musculature which is more typical of men than of women. Right? That's not true of all the trades. There were great women weavers, for example. Weaving was primarily a woman's activity. There were men weavers, but women dominated it. But men dominated almost exclusively stonemasonry, and so the earliest Freemasons were all men. Well, in France, in the late 19th century, one lodge of masculine masons initiated women and founded what is called Maçonnerie mixed, or in English, co-Freemasonry. And then Annie Besant got herself initiated into that French mixed masonry very early in the 20th century. And she formed a rather different kind of co-Freemasonry from this. And her co-Freemasonry was different, partly because it was very clearly another manifestation of that archetypal reality. All right, so much for Masonic history. Now, as I said, the stonemasons of Europe associated themselves with the building of King Solomon's Temple, and King Solomon's Temple is the dominant central image in Freemasonry. Gnosticism does not have a single central image. It has many images. Remember we said that Gnosticism has great variety, with lots of myths, and consequently there is no central single image in Gnosticism. There are many different ones. Alchemy does have a single central image, and that is the Philosopher's Stone. But the Philosopher's Stone does not lend itself to pictorial representation, to representation in pictures. So although it's the central glyph in alchemy, it is not pictured a great deal. Kabbalah does have a central glyph or image, and I kept showing it to you, right, the other day, and it is the Tree of Life. Well, what the Tree of Life is to Kabbalah, King Solomon's Temple is to Freemasonry, the dominant central glyph. We don't know what King Solomon's Temple looked like. It is described in the Jewish scriptures, but that description is not detailed enough or complete enough for us to have a accurate picture of it, but it has been reconstructed many times. And this is a late 17th century reconstruction of what the temple looked like. And I'll just point out one or two things about this reconstruction which are of some interest. Notice that there are some courtyards which are in front of the temple. This is the temple itself. How many courtyards are there in front of the temple? 3, right? Is the approach to the mystery, is a threefold approach to the mystery normal in spiritual traditions? How about the voice of the silence? Remember the voice of the silence? There are 3 halls through which one passes before one reaches the shoreless ocean. Okay. Okay, so same sort of thing. And notice also here there are two columns. I'm pointing these out because they're going to appear in some of the later pictures at the entrance to the temple itself. All right, now that King Solomon's temple becomes a kind of inspiration to the medieval cathedral builders. Here's a picture of Ripon Cathedral in England, which was constructed in the mid-12th century. And in a sense, all of these medieval cathedrals were the equivalent of King Solomon's temple. And here is a picture of a Masonic temple, or lodge room. It's a room in the building of the Grand Lodge of New York. Large Masonic buildings often have many, many different temples which are decorated in different designs. There may be an Egyptian theme, or there may be a Gothic theme, or a Renaissance theme, and this happens to be a Gothic one, so that everything is rather Gothic in feeling. And notice that the ceiling is the heavens with stars in it. All right, now Freemasonry itself is very complex. This diagram was originally published in an American magazine called Life many years ago. And it's a little problem because it was a two-page spread and I had a little trouble copying it for that reason. But so there's a kind of hiatus here in the middle. Don't worry about that. The basis of all Freemasonry is what are called the craft degrees, and there are 3 of them. 3 courts to the temple, 3 halls, and there are 3 degrees. Those are the basis of all Freemasonry. And then after the 3rd degree, at which one, the 1st degree is called that of the entered apprentice, the 2nd degree is called that of the fellow craftsman, and the 3rd degree is that of the master mason. After the 3rd degree, there are 2 options. One of them is what are called the York Rite, and the other is called the Scottish Rite. York Rite degrees are not numbered, they are only named, and they have names like Holy Royal Arch, or like Knights Templar. The Scottish Rite degrees are numbered, and there are 33 of them. Actually, there are 30 of them, but they're numbered from 4 to 33 because they resume the numbering of the first 3. One of those is the degree of the Rose and the Cross, the Rosicrucian degree, and another is, we'll get to those. Okay, so that's sort of the structure of Freemasonry. Now, the association of building with spiritual activity is very old. It long antedates, it comes long before Freemasonry. This is a 13th century drawing, illustration from a manuscript. And this shows God. And what is God doing? What has he got in his hands?
Compass.
A set of compasses, right? And compasses, what are compasses used for?
Geometry.
For drawing circles. And he's using it to draw a circle, and that circle is the boundary of the universe. So God is a mason, right? Using compasses to draw a circle to mark off the boundaries of the universe. So that concept is very old. It was not invented by Freemasonry. They simply latched onto it. Now, Freemasonry has been very important in European culture. So, for example, we have Mozart was a Freemason, and his opera, The Magic Flute, is well known as a Masonic opera. Those of you who are familiar with the Magic Flute will know that the overture, the opening music to it, has some Masonic rhythms in it. Any Mason hearing the overture to the Magic Flute will recognize what's happening. There are certain beats in it, which are traditional Masonic beats. And this is a scene from the Magic Flute where everybody is gathered in front of the three. The Magic Flute is interesting as a Masonic opera. Mozart got into big trouble for writing it. Right? He got into big trouble because the Masons thought he was revealing Masonic secrets. Yeah. But one interesting thing about it is, those of you who know the Magic Flute will know who is the central character in it. The young man, Tomino, and he has, and there's a young woman, Tamina, who he is in love with. And what happens to the two of them at the end of the Magic Flute? They are both initiated into this mystical order, which the Magic Flute is about, which is clearly the Masonic order. And so he's got men and women back together. Mozart did. This is an interesting scene because it shows all the people before the three gates to the temple. And the gates have names. One is, and of course they're German, since the opera is in German. One is named Vernunft, which means what in German? Reason. One is named Weisheit, wisdom, and one is named Natur, nature. So they are named reason, wisdom, and nature. Good friends, those are the three logi. Vernunft, or reason, is the first logos. What is the Greek word for reason? What is a Greek word for reason?
Idea.
Oh, that's one word. I'm thinking of logos. Logos in Greek means word, but in the Christian tradition of its use, it also means reason, order. And Weisheit is the second logos, and Natur is the third. Or if you like, these are the three ways one approaches spiritual reality. Through knowledge, through love. Wisdom is love, right? Wisdom and love go together. Through knowledge, through love, and through work, through action. All right, here, and that great Freemasonic influence on Western culture carried over to the New World. George Washington, who is the first president of the United States, was a Freemason. And here is a painting showing George Washington laying the cornerstone for the Capitol, the building in which the Congress meets. And he is in his Masonic garb, that's his Masonic apron. Freemasons wear aprons, or as they are called in England, pinnies, because that's what the stonemasons wore to protect their clothing, although the Freemasonic apron has symbolic meaning. Now let's look at a number of Freemasonic symbols because they are quite interesting things. One of them is the compasses. And that word is always plural because each half is a compass. So the set of them is called compasses. And the compasses are used to draw circles. And what do circles mean or symbolize? Eternity, because there is no end to them, or the spiritual. And that's one of the two great Masonic tools. We saw God using one, right, in that earlier illustration. The other main Masonic tool is the square. And what are squares used to draw? Squares. Right angles, what you need for the square. And what do squares symbolize? The material and time limitation. And if you combine compasses with a square, what do you get? The square and compasses, which is the basic Masonic symbol. And if the circle is spirit and the square is matter, then the compasses are wholeness, right? Wholeness or holiness. Remember I told you yesterday the whole and holy come from the same source. Wholeness, holiness, completeness, samadhi. Samadhi is the experience of the oneness. And in fact, samadhi is a Sanskrit word whose parts mean getting it together. let's change those into this. The Masonic square and compasses often has a G in it, the meaning of which is argued. But if you take the square and compasses and you draw a line across from one end of the square to the other, what do you get? A downward pointing triangle. And if you draw a line across from the 2 points of the compasses, what do you get? The upward pointing triangle. Right? So the square and compasses are Solomon's seal, the hexagram, which we have in the Theosophical seal, with not a G in the center, but a tau. And what does the tau cross mean? It means many things, of course, but life. Okay. Now, I'm going to run through, and I'm going to do this quickly because time is slipping away, some of the Masonic tracing boards. Tracing boards are symbolic representations of the 3 craft degrees in Freemasonry. Each degree has its own tracing board. Tracing boards are descendants of the plan. The blueprint or plan, which the builders used in constructing a building. If you're going to make a building, you need a plan to follow. So the tracing boards are plans for what goes on in a particular Masonic degree. There is no set design for the plans. In ancient days, in early days in Freemasonry, they didn't use pictures like this. Instead, they drew them on the floor with chalk. And at the beginning of a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, they washed them away. That's highly symbolical too. Have any of you ever seen Tibetan monks do a mandala, create a mandala? They do it on the ground, right, with colored substances. And when they get all done with this beautiful, elaborate mandala, which may take them days to do, as soon as they finish, what do?
They destroy it.
Wipe it away, right? Because all things in life are transitory, even the most beautiful and the most meaningful. That was what originally the tracing boards were done for. But since the early Freemasons met in various places, it was hard always to do this on the floor. So they began putting it on a board instead. And that's the origin of the tracing board. Now just a few things about this. What is this?
Jacob's ladder.
Jacob's ladder. We've seen that before, haven't we? And the symbolism is exactly the same here as in the earlier times. It is a connection between earth and heaven. And notice in the heavens we have the sun, we have the moon, and 7 stars, and we have an eye. Right? An all-seeing eye, which represents the divine consciousness. And then lots of other things that we don't have time to go into in great detail, but I'll just mention 2 others. 2 pieces of stone here. These pieces of stone are called ashlars. Ashlar is an old word for a block of stone. One is a rough ashlar. It's just been hewn out of the hillside, and the other is a smooth or perfect ashlar. It's been turned into a cube and highly polished. All Freemasons, when they enter Freemasonry, are rough ashlars. And what is the purpose of Masonry? To turn a rough ashlar into a perfect ashlar. And what happens to the perfect ashlar once it has been smoothed and perfected, polished and made perfect? What do you do with stones? You put them into a building. Which building do you put them into? King Solomon's temple. Masonry is rebuilding King Solomon's temple. Not physically, but emblematically, spiritually, metaphorically. And every Freemason is a stone in King Solomon's temple. Right? What is the purpose of a temple? What was the purpose of King Solomon's temple?
Worship.
To be the dwelling place of God. Right? So what is humanity as a whole? The dwelling place of the divine. Right? Because we are all divine in our essence. And when we get together and construct ourselves into a temple, then we have the divine in our midst. Right? That's what Freemasonry is all about. All right, that was a, let's go back to that for a moment. That was a very early 19th century tracing board. This is a modern tracing board, but with essentially the same basic elements. They're still Jacob's ladder. The second degree tracing board, again, this is an early 19th century version, has two parts traditionally. This one big part and then a little part down here. The big part shows a winding stairway that leads upward to a chamber. It has the two great pillars that we saw outside King Solomon's Temple in that reconstruction. And we have two guards, or wardens, guarding the bottom and the top of the stairway. And in the picture down below, we have a river coming to a waterfall with next to which grows a stalk of grain. Oh, on top, yeah, well, these are globes, but with what's called fretwork around them. One is the globe of the earth, the other is the globe of the heavens. This is interesting because how much did you learn about the Eleusinian mysteries when you were out there yesterday? We don't know a lot about what happened in the Eleusinian mysteries, even though they were practiced for maybe 2,000 years. Everybody who was initiated swore secrecy, and they kept it largely. But we do know a few things, mainly from the early church fathers who set out to put down the mysteries. And one of the church fathers says, you know what they do in those mysteries. They're so silly. We have this big ceremony, and at the end of the ceremony, the high priest, the hierophant, the big guy running the show, holds up a stalk of grain. Isn't that silly? Ladies and gentlemen, in the Roman Mass, what happens at the high point of the Mass? The host is held up. What is the host? A piece of bread, which is made from grain, right? So the symbolism of the Roman Mass is exactly the same as the symbolism of the initiation at Eleusis. And both of them involve grain. Grain is very important because it symbolizes death and resurrection, right? You bury the grain, that's death. But the grain sprouts and regrows, and that's resurrection. So that's why that stalk of grain is so important there. All right, this is a modern version of the second degree tracing board, and it is a little different in that outdoor scene is now glimpsed only through arches. I'm sorry, these are not very clear because what I copied them from was not clear to begin with. All right, the third degree tracing board, oh my goodness. What is the dominant figure in it? Skull and crossbones, but what is it on? A coffin. Remember, death and resurrection, right? Is the primary thing. And remember, it's not death and resurrection of the body we're talking about. It's death of the old and rebirth of the new. So all of this represents death, but what is here at the top? A little plant sprouting and growing. Right? So that's the renewal. Okay. And this is a modern tracing board for the third degree. Essentially the same as the earlier one, except there is this manuscript page across it. And we won't go into it in a lot of detail. There's some Hebrew writing on the right and a picture here in the center. And what do we have on the left? A diagram of a five-pointed star. And I just call that your attention to that because tomorrow I'm going to talk about five-pointed stars and what their significance is. All right, well then very quickly, beyond the third degree, There are, in the Scottish Rite, 30 other degrees, and the 18th of those other degrees is called the Rose-Croix degree or the Rosicrucian degree. And it is symbolized with what is called a jewel. And this jewel has on it a pelican with a lot of little pelicans, birdlings around it, and the pelican is biting into its own breast to feed the birds from itself. And here we have the cross and the rose. And the cross and the rose is exactly the same symbol as the lotus and the jewel. Same symbolic meaning. All right, now here we have a big Masonic mural, which is in the Grand Lodge of the state of California in the U.S. And you will see a lot of Masonic symbols on it. Let me just run through them rather briefly. Here happens to be the obverse or front of the seal of the United States. Whoops. What happened? We won't take time to go over those. Let me just finish. There were a number of symbols in that, and what I really wanted to show you was the reverse, the back of the Great Seal of the United States, which shows a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid there is an all-seeing eye, just like that all-seeing eye from the tracing board. Many of the founders of the United States were Freemasons, and you have a lot of Masonic symbolism in early documents and symbols in America. Okay, basically then, the last slide was simply a summary of some things we've been talking about, and so let me just tell you what those points are in the summary. First, humanity as a whole is the temple of the divine, and each one of us is a stone in that temple. And so the purpose of life is to smooth ourselves, to turn ourselves into perfect stones so that we have a perfect temple in which the divine can dwell. We are all, and God here is the monad, the one self. And each of us is a reflective monad. And so we need to be perfect. The process of fitting ourselves to be worthy parts of that temple is the purpose of Freemasonry, to help us do that. It is a spiritual path, like any other spiritual path. That is its purpose. The process of fitting ourselves in Freemasonry is a ritual quest. One goes through degree after degree after degree after degree, and it seems it will never end. And what's the point of that? Well, there is a wonderful line, which we will come to tomorrow also, from a little book called Light on the Path by Mabel Collins. And that line is, you will enter the light, but you will never touch the flame. The search has no end, right? It is an eternal search. Why does it have no end? Because the end is infinite. It is all, and we can never reach it, but we can continue to approach it. And so in Masonry, one goes through degree after degree. You think, aha, in this degree I've learned the secret. Then in the next degree you discover you did not learn the secret in the earlier one. There's a new secret to learn. And that goes on and on. But the purpose of that is, you will enter the light, but you will never touch the flame. And all Masonic secrets are symbols of the interior experience of entering the light. The search is endless. And each stage in the search is a death and resurrection, because we die to the old and are born to the new. And this is Krishnamurti's message. This is Krishnamurti's message. That every moment of our lives, we die to the past and are born to the new. Right? So that we are constantly dying and being reborn. So don't worry about the death of the body. It's just one more experience out of a whole set of them, all of which are death and resurrection. And that is the central message of Freemasonry. So we have about 4 minutes left. Oh, didn't I do well today? Do any of you who are from England know that commercial that was very common in English television in which someone says, "Oh, didn't she do well?" Very good. So since we have about 4 minutes, are there any questions that I can answer? Yes, ma'am?
I have a question. How is it determined whether someone moves to the next stage? Is that a collective decision based on specific?
There are examinations.
Written or
Oral. You have, well, this varies somewhat according to the particular discipline or Masonic group you're in. But in Masonic groups I'm associated with, you have to learn certain things and you're examined on them. And you have oral examination.
is there any connection to the practice, to how a person lives their lives? Or they do it intellectually?
Well, all of the intellectual knowledge in Freemasonry is symbolic of the practice of living. Yeah.
I'm using in America, from England, to allow females to be Masons.
Traditional Masonry, whether in America or in England, admits only men. But in both England and America, there are Masonic orders which admit women and men on equal footing. Oh, in England as well, absolutely. If you want to know about that, I happen to be very good friends with the Grand Master of the English Order, who happens to be a woman. Yeah.
Where's Blavatsky Freemason?
Was Blavatsky a Freemason? That's a very interesting question. I gave a Blavatsky lecture in England some years ago on that subject. The answer is yes and no. The actual answer, the true answer is no. But she was given an honorary Masonic diploma by an English order of Freemasons, which did admit women. It was an unusual order. And her Masonic diploma you will find reproduced in her collected writings. So she was an honorary Freemason. But she knew Freemasonry. She knew it very well. She knew all of the secrets, all of the substitute secrets. There's a wonderful story about a man who met Blavatsky, and they got talking about various things. They were part of a group, and Freemasonry came into the discussion, and she called it into the center of the room, and he says, "She did certain things with me, and she whispered certain things into my ear which I cannot repeat." And if any of you are Freemasons, this was the 3rd degree secrets, very clearly. So she knew it all.
Thank you. Is that what the same thing? You gave me the 3rd degree.
Beg pardon?
Is that what the same thing? You gave me the 3rd degree.
Absolutely. Masonic language is inherently very conservative and very old-fashioned, but it's influenced our language and practices in many ways. So to give somebody the third degree is a kind of rough degree, much rougher than the 1st and 2nd, and because of the roughness, because it is the degree of death and resurrection, right? The first 2 are just preparations for it. I didn't really feel I was a Freemason when I took the 1st degree and the 2nd degree. In fact, I took the 1st degree and I said to myself, what have I gotten myself into? Here's a bunch of adults that are behaving like little children, forming secret clubs with secrets and signs of recognition, and isn't all of this silly? But I had promised that I would go through all first 3 degrees when I started, so I'm a man of my word. Took the 3rd degree, and that's when I became a Freemason, in my heart, right? It's very powerful. Rough, but powerful. Yeah.
Is it known why Madame Blavatsky didn't become an official member?
Because in Madame Blavatsky's day, there was no possibility really of women becoming official members. That organization into which she was initiated was not standard Masonry. It was one of the, in fact, it probably really didn't exist in reality. It was invented or got up by an Englishman who liked to do that sort of thing, and he gave out diplomas as honorary sorts of things. There really was no practice which involved women in her day.
It's this symbol, this one and that one, when you put them together, for me is the masculine and feminine.
Yes, yes, of course.
And I assume that that's a really developed design.
Right.
And the other thing was, I thought that maybe on the diagram that you did of the links, that there might be a link between the ancient mysteries and that went up towards the craft, the cathedral builders.
Yes.
Which comes from the Druids.
Might well be. Sure.
Defilement.
Sure. Yeah, that historical diagram you could modify in all sorts of ways.
It was the one that for me it felt like in the British tradition, there's this notion that's legend, maybe we would call it,
Yes.
of the connection between the Mason craftsmen and the ones who put up the standard stones and the capacity to feel.
Sure. Anything else? Paul?
Would you tell that story of Alcott when he saved his life by making some signs when he went?
All right. You mean at the time of the trial?
Yeah.
Okay. Colonel Alcott was himself a Freemason. He was, I'm not sure what his highest degree was. He was certainly Holy Royal Arch, I know that. But he was a Freemason. He was also in, this was his younger years, before he met Madame Blavatsky. He was a reporter. In fact, that's how he met Madame Blavatsky, because he went to a meeting to report on it, and she was there. But he also went as a reporter to cover a very famous trial. There was an American